if you look back on the last 2,500 years, we've seen many utopias, and they all collapsed when they wanted to put them in place. If you think about the Soviet Union, several theocracies have been conceived. Societies that are just, societies without conflict. And why do we take it up again, that theme of utopias? Because we want to articulate a preference. We want to articulate our preferences for a future economy, and we know quite well that it's not going to turn out that way. But how can we measure the present? We can measure the present either compared to the past or to some utopian future that we envision. So utopias is a good measuring stick. Now this roundtable is about the economy, and by now we know that a lot of things are wrong with the economy, both with the economy as a system, as a practice, and as a science. Some chaos there, some confusion, lots of greed in that domain. And with this roundtable, we're not concerned about how we got into this mess, but rather how we can get out of it. How can we invent, how can we imagine an ideal economic system and also an ideal practice of economy. We've invited three very, very brilliant minds here today, and we will talk about these three gentlemen, how we can do that, how can we make sure that economic actors have skin in the game, that they have upside but also downsides, how can we make sure that we stop fetishizing the economy, treat it like a sex symbol, and how can we make sure that civilized behavior that we have currently doesn't fall back into barbarism. Let me introduce you to the three gentlemen here on stage. We have John Gray, who flew in from the UK yesterday, from London. We have Nassim Taleb, who flew in from New York. And we have Thomas Sedlacek, who came in from Prague. So it's going to be an international round. I will introduce each of those three gentlemen separately before their little speech. And this is how we're going to do it today. Each one has about 5 to 10 minutes to expand an idea of their vision, how an economy should work. And then we're just going to talk. So 5 to 10 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes, and then we're just going to discuss. And maybe at the end we have time to open it up to the public. So let's start with John. We strongly believe that progress, moral progress and social progress, is linked to science and the technological progress. So the more progress we make in science, the more moral progress we do. And that's basically the Enlightenment program, the Aufklärung. And we are all part here of that 500-year-old tradition. Now,
that's Switzerland.
Minus Switzerland.
No, it's good, for a good reason.
Why?
We're
going to talk about this. Okay. And we believe that all societies will eventually be in that Enlightenment tradition, otherwise they become roadkill. I'd like to introduce you to a thinker who begs to differ. Could it be that the belief in science, in rational thought, that it translates into moral progress, is that just a utopia? Is that the big utopia that we're talking about? 5 years ago, Nassim called me enthusiastically from London. He had what he called the best dinner of his life.
It was lunch.
Oh, lunch. It was lunch. And it was with John Gray. And I asked, is that the guy who wrote Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus? And he said, no, not that idiot, the real John Gray, the philosopher John Gray. While I've heard of the philosopher John Gray, I haven't read his work, so I went on Amazon and purchased every single book, and I read every single book, and I was awestruck. And seldom have I encountered such an original thinker. For me, John is one of the deepest living philosophers around. And that's why I'm so thrilled, John, that you're here on stage. You're Professor Emeritus of the London School of Economics. You have taught at Oxford, Harvard, Yale, and Madrid. And since your retirement from academic life, you've become a full-time writer. You've written books like Grey's Anatomy, Black Mass, Straw Dogs, one of my favorite, False Dawn, The Delusions of Global Capitalism, and now the latest one, which you just gave it to me. What is
Silence of Animals.
Silence of Animals. I just got it today, 5 minutes ago. You write for The Guardian, The Independent, The New Statesman, The New York Review of Books, The New Republic, and other journals. His writings have been translated into over 30 languages, but like Borges, one of his favorite authors, he is as proud of the books he has read as any that he has written. John, you start with your statement.
Thank you very much, Rob, for that introduction. I guess I should begin by saying that utopia to me, the original word I think meant nowhere, and utopia to me means any kind of social or political situation or project that we can know in advance to be logical. And so, in a sense, I'm in a paradoxical situation when I try and explain what my utopia would be, because I'm trying to explain something that I think would be impossible. Because my utopia is a variety of economic systems, which in the present times means a variety of capitalisms, in each of which people are able to learn from their mistakes. And that means, as Nassim has often expressed, that has implications not only about knowledge but also about incentives. It means people do have to have skin in the game and they do have to pay for their mistakes. And if their mistakes are big, then that might be a reason for looking at the institutions in which they made those mistakes, breaking them up, changing them, or in the case of banks, maybe turning delinquent banks into public utilities. The problem with economic utopias is, I think, twofold. The problem with economic utopias of various kinds, not just communism, but also some type of laissez-faire capitalism, and also with the sort of economic utopia which I think is embodied in the European single currency, is that they derive from very simple theories. Economic theory may be immensely clever, it may be heavily mathematically developed, it may not be comprehensible to the vast majority of people, but basically the underlying assumptions are simple and often wrong. Let me give you a simple example of that. One of the assumptions of a lot of economic theory is that human beings, the actions of human beings, are predominantly the product of calculation of some kind, whether it be a calculation of advantage, of utilities, or preference satisfaction, or whatever it might be. My observation of history, including the rise and fall of economic utopias and other utopias, is that the predominant form of human action, particularly when things are desperate, but even in non-desperate times, is not calculation, but suggestion. Human beings react to the news. They react along with other human beings. They react according to the mood of the time. When they act, it's not always, or even generally, to achieve some external goal or object of commodity. It's very often, especially when they're desperate, to vent their feelings. So, if you think of suggestion as being a very powerful motive, a very powerful form of human action rather than calculation, you'll see that the models of human action which underlie most or many economic theories are just too simple. By the way, people often ask me, don't they apply in parts of life? Don't these models of simple calculation apply in parts of life? Well, the only one I've discovered, the only context I think in which they apply unequivocally and have a high predictive value is departments of economics. In departments of economics, people plan their long-term stratagems and calculate each move of their careers because they've internalized the model and they apply it to this construct, a career. They also have tenure in most countries. So there's not that much downside for them. In the real world, really big crises don't have the form of game theory. Game theory, which is a form of this rational choice model, doesn't really include things like hatred, revenge, retaliation, despair, or cruelty. It doesn't include these common human motives. So it can't really account. It's a fundamental error if you analyze what's going on in the Eurozone now the ECB has done this, the Bank of Cyprus has done that. Underlying, they're tit for tat, they're applying various game theoretic models. Underlying it, I think, are fairly strong and powerful feelings of anger, despair, humiliation, hatred, revenge, hope, not much of that, but powerful human emotions. And yet that kind of game theoretic modeling, which has a limited application maybe in some forms of corporate bargaining, is often used to analyze economic and political situations. Second point, second reason why economic utopias very often, I would say always, fail, is that those who promote them come to see them not as fallible, embodying fallible theories and projects which need to be revised in the light of experience. They identify the project or the utopia with the meaning of their lives. And then we have a phenomenon which is very powerful in human history, including the present, which was examined by a rather wonderful book written by an American. I don't know if you remembered it some time ago, a woman called Barbara Tuchman, a non-professional economist. She was a non-professional historian. She was an academic, but she actually never, I don't think she was ever in the Department of History. And she wrote a book called The March of Folly. And what she brings out in this book, she takes various examples from the Trojan horse in ancient Greek history, right up to the Vietnam War. What she examines in this is a very, very important and profound thing, which is the difference between folly and error. Errors can, in principle, be corrected. Maybe in practice, they're not often corrected in politics and economics, but they can. But folly occurs when human beings become so attached to their projects that they're willing to promote them even at the cost of their own destruction. That's folly. Folly can't be corrected. Folly runs its course to the bitter end, normally. So I think there are many, so there are two reasons, and I'll come to two reasons why economic utopias, like other utopias, once they're in place, once they're in train, they can only eventually collapse, which can take a terribly long time, actually, once they're in place. They can't normally be corrected as they go along. Partly because the theories are too simple that people are using, and partly also because the people who promote the project become attached to the project as the meaning of their lives. They would have to admit that their lives, as in the case of communism, for example, many, especially Western communists, visiting someone from a visiting East European university told me that he was taken aside in the Cold War era by the main informer in this department and said, when you go to Oxford, be very careful. So why is that? The place is full of communists. And it was especially Western communists, but also others, attach themselves to the project, even to the point at which, until it collapses, they do nothing. When it collapses, they jump off and join some other project, but they don't actually produce the collapse. So back to my utopia. My utopia would be whatever, and it's impossible, but my utopia would be that economic systems would vary because circumstances vary. Some economic systems don't work anywhere. For example, communism. Maybe the present world central banks isn't working very well. But in the variety of types of economy that exist, there should ideally be ones in which people can learn from their mistakes, and even more ideally and more fantastically want to learn from their mistakes. As Oscar Wilde put it, actually did say this, the aim in life is to commit as many mistakes as possible and learn from them as fast as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, John. So before I come over to Nessun, just one question. If I understand you correctly, it will always be of a capitalist system.
I think with complex industrial societies, you can have many pockets or enclaves which are run in different ways. And one of the big errors of recent years, or follies of recent years, has been the idea that every institution should be a business. So in Britain, for example, we've introduced market mechanisms into universities, even into the armed forces. As a serving soldier said to me, if I jump in front of my comrade to prevent him from being blown up, do I think 2% more? It's an absurdity. It's an absurdity. But the core of, I think, all modern industrial economies will be a set of market processes and a set of market practices based on forms of private property. But in a decent society, they should be surrounded by churches, charities, universities, schools, cultural institutions, some of which, many of which was true until quite recently, run by non-market ethos. But the answer is yes, it will be types of capital.
So, in the fall of 2004, a European media mogul invited me, Hubert Burda, to partake in what he described as an informal exchange, 2003, of intellectuals. Informal exchange of intellectuals. I never considered myself to be an intellectual. I studied business and became an entrepreneur. But I had written at that time 2 novels. I think that qualified me to be part of that circle. And Nassim Taleb was sitting at the table at that time. He was an obscure Wall Street trader with a penchant for philosophy, and he had published some wonderful books that I had read. And I was introduced to him as an authority on the English and Scottish Enlightenment, particularly David Hume, which I obviously got mixed up with somebody else. But stunned, I nevertheless, I didn't say anything, and I just smiled hesitantly. And then Nassim pulled up a chair and tapped on the chair, and I sat down, and then we started a conversation. First about David Hume, but then mercifully the conversation shifted over to business and Wall Street, and the thinking mistakes that the actors, economic actors make, ourselves included. And following that, Nassim sent me pages from a manuscript, a gem of a book, which I commented on, and these went on to form part of his international bestseller, The Black Swan. The book catapulted Taleb into an intellectual all-star league, and he has followed it up with several other books. The latest one is Anti-Fragile, or Antifragilität, and you can buy it outside. He urged me never to write non-fiction books. He said, stay with fiction, it's much sexier. Well, I have sinned since then, and have done some non-fiction work, and have done the unsexy part of writing. So, please, Nassim, your statement.
Thank you very much. Very honored, sono molto onorato di essere qui. Parlo poco italiano, no, per parlare in inglese. I'm actually honored to be here on 2 counts. One, Italy, and the other one, Switzerland, because you guys talking about utopia, and utopia doesn't look like utopia. And in fact, the closest thing in my new book I found to utopia is what doesn't at all look like what you expect. It's supposed to some structure that will be similar to that of Switzerland. Namely, it has 3 attributes. The first one is decentralization, not political mistakes. So we have hubris. And this is what he detects in human nature. With human, we're born with hubris, we'll die with hubris, we'll always have hubris. So it protects us from hubris, decentralizing mistakes. The United States, for the past 10 years, had 2 major mistakes. One, George Bush's war of Iraq. The other, Mr. Greenspan trying to smooth out the economy, utopianism, economic utopianism. And of course, it blew it up. So you realize you want to decentralize things. That's the first rule. Right? The second rule is no deficit at the total level, at the top. You want to run a deficit, run it at the bottom. That way you don't have bailouts. You don't have the decentralization of deficits as well. And the third rule is skin in the game. Nobody should be allowed to make a mistake, all right, that harms others without being harmed. This is the principle of civilization that sort of has disappeared recently. It was a bureaucrat that is not harmed by a mistake. I have a spreadsheet looking at me. And then look at, or an economist is not harmed by a mistake. This is why economic models are complete nonsense. Okay? And it continues to be nonsense because we pay for the mistake, not them. Right? Predictions don't work, but the predictor is not harmed. So if you have skin in the game as both a risk management rule and an equity rule, I should not tell you what I'm predicting. I will tell you what I have in my portfolio. That way, if I lose money, I'm harmed more than you are. Okay? So the third rule is skin in the game, generalized as both risk management rule and ethical rule. Okay? if you have these three rules, and it looks like Switzerland is the one that's conscious of the last one, visibly by capping corporate executives' income, because corporate executives have more upside than downside. Entrepreneurs are harmed by the mistake, not corporate executives. That's a little bit. So it looks like, now let me go to the center of the problem, which is the topic of my new book. I wrote the last one, explaining that the world is way too unpredictable for us humans to handle it. Okay? But yet the world has been around for 3 billion, nature for 3 billion years and counting. And it doesn't look like, it has had much problems with unpredictability. Why? Well, it so happens that there are a lot of things that learn from the mistakes and actually use disorder for fuel. And I call that category of objects beyond the robust. The robust doesn't break. The category is the revert antifragilità. Of things that gain from disorder and use it, and we have to realize that utopia has to look like that. Things that benefit from the unexpected. There are too many unexpected things to think that we can count for. And this category of object, what I call the antifragile, visibly, are often stifled by modernity. Your body is made for stressors. Now I have to say that there's a cluster of things you benefit from. Disorder, volatility, volatilità, variability, stressors, time is volatility, and other things. So you benefit from one, you benefit from all of them. The category of object is around us. Okay, you can see it. Even your body, in a limited way, needs some variability. You go to the gym for stressors, you skip meals, you fast, it improves you. So the idea, and the problem is, since modernity came, and I'm glad that John Gray to help me build a case against modernity, because otherwise if I talk about modernity, people think I'm a lunatic, right? But when after meeting John Gray, I realized, hey, I'm not crazy. There are other people who share the same belief, who see it the way it is. What did modernity do? Let's talk economic policy. They say no more boom and bust. That's what I did. No more boom and bust. Okay, if you give them the seasons, you will keep temperature at 21.2 degrees. Is this the optimum? Or 22.3 degrees, right? Year round. Okay, eliminate boom and bust. Visibly, if you stifle variation in the natural system, you blow it up. That's the problem. And I found the mistake, in my new book called The Mistake of Modernity, the thinking a human being is a machine or a complex system is like a machine. I call it mistaking your cat for the washing machine. And let me explain it. A washing machine or watch, even made in Switzerland, if you bang it, it's not going to improve. Okay? If you something non-organic, it's not going to, use it and lose it. You see? It has wear and tear. And if you have an engineer constantly trying to make it perfect, it's not going to work. Hence, this watch is better because there's someone obsessed with this mechanism. But human body, if you try obsessively to prevent it from experiencing stressors, what do to it? You weaken it. Why? Because a complex system communicates with an environment via stressors. I get the sun, stressor, boom, signal, switch something, attack. I lift weight, switch something, I build muscle, to anticipate more of that. You communicate with the environment with it. So, if you remove all stressors, as we try to do with modernity, anything top-down has some attributes, makes mistakes by removing stressors, it makes everything smooth, and then things blow up. And now there's science, and now what I've done with anti-fragile, I took 3.5 years locked up. And I wrote the scientific papers before the rest. So the ill of modernity can be mapped scientifically using the very tools modernity gave us, namely statistical techniques. So this is what I have to say, is that we know how utopia would look like. It's not your idea of heaven sitting on a cloud with a cocktail and zero stressors. It's more like life on Earth All you have to do is remove the extreme unhappiness. We should imitate nature because it has done things smarter than humans. It understands much more than humans, except in the moral domain, where there's something called the naturalistic fallacy. Nature is not moral. So we have to protect the very weak. You protect the weak, and you let things have some variability, because life likes variability. This water, if I don't have variability, there's nothing that tastes better than a glass of water, okay, if I spend 2 days in the Sahara Desert, all right, and then drink it, it's good. So existentially, I want variability, you see, and the economy has to have that.
Thank you, Nassim. Again, one quick question. Same question that I posed to John. It will always be in a market setting, in a purely capitalistic, hardcore capitalistic system.
It's not hardcore. I don't like to use the word capitalism. Adam Smith did not use capitalism. Okay, Adam Smith actually wanted skin in the game. He didn't like the limited liability. The problem we have today when we use capitalism, people think in terms of crony capitalism, where you protect the strong. Like in France, they call themselves socialists, but it's crony capitalism to protect the strong. To me, a real market system is a system in which institutions have, institutions, have expiration dates. And the minute an institution becomes big, it blows up. Just like we don't have a lot of elephants on the planet, we have, I think, 1,000 times more rats in New York City than elephants on the planet. Rats, small animals, you get the idea? So the beauty of capitalism is if you follow these natural cycles, anything big explodes. The problem with government is that governments, they prop up the big, they say, oh, he employs a lot of people. So what do? You start employing a lot of people so they pay you out. You see the idea? So the problem so I endorse a system that's naturalistic in which the governments would not bail out corporations, but they would bail out individuals. One in which you help people take risk, not corporations, like in America, not the Obama model, but the California model. Learn to fail, and as John Gray would say, love failure, fail fast. 7 times before you get it right, okay, make it honorable. You see, that's California. The only thing that's still working in America is California. Okay.
Silicon Valley.
Silicon Valley, all right? The Silicon Valley model of entrepreneurship. This is the kind of thing that uses the solar properly, and they love the solar, right? And they use it properly. But so when you say market capitalism, people associate capitalism with very large corporations with capital, right? And this is why I don't like the word capitalism. The negative connotation: large corporations, large banks propped up by the state, where you go study in a good school, St. Gallen, Switzerland, or something like that, whatever, and then you go with friends, put you in chairman of UBS or something. That kind of crap. So the real capital is California, Silicon Valley, where you can go up very fast. So the road from Cullersdorm to Google can be very, very short. And all of us can be part of it. And guess what? The corollary is the road from Google to Cullersdorm should also be very short. Okay? And that is the central thing. And then one number, I'm a statistician, so this is, you always have to back up the numbers, to understand how real capitalism or market works by destroying the big. Look at the top corporations in 1950, 1980, 2000, 2012. You'll be shocked. There's something about large corporations that want to commit suicide. And if it weren't for the government, it'd be even faster. So this is where, if you're a communist at heart, you should love that kind of market capitalism, equal opportunity to go bust.
Okay, well, thank you for the statement. Thomas Selacek has bright red hair, and he's...
You're a communist at heart, you should love that kind of market capitalism, equal opportunity to go bust.
Okay, well, thank you for the statement. Thomas Selacek has bright red hair, and he's tall, you can hardly miss him. He loves to talk about economics, fairy tale for adults, how he calls it. He loves to be provocative. And his book, The Economics of Good and Evil, which you can also buy outside, became a bestseller and was awarded the Frankfurt Book Fair's Deutsche Wirtschaftsbuchpreis. When he was younger, at the age of 24, he was advisor to the then president Václav Havel. Professionally, he's a chief macroeconomist at one of the biggest Czech banks. And when in Prague, there's quite a high probability of meeting him riding on a bicycle, going to some pub debate with some night owls of this Bohemian capital. Thomas, your statement, please.
Thank you very much for having me. Of course, one possibility is that if presented with the situation today, this would seem like a fulfilled utopia in the history of mankind. One of the probabilities, or we must not dismiss the probability that, let's say, 90% of the, let's say, situation of today is, in fact, an utopia fulfilled in much more fantastic ways than all the utopias that we have read. I'm not saying from 100%, but from majority of the observation. The problem with utopias, philosophically speaking, is the most fundamental problem when we compare ideal with the real. Ideas should be compared, ideal against the ideal. That was sort of the why I think communism as a strange ideology could win over capitalism in my country for 50 years, is because ideal communism looked better than real capitalism, but this happens all the time. Ideal capitalism will always look better than real communism, etc., etc. So if one needs to be, if one wants to be proper, we should compare ideal with the ideal, disregard the real, or the real with the real, which is impossible if we're talking about ideal utopia. So there we must be aware that we always make this intellectual mistake where we compare ideal utopias, they need to be ideal because they're not yet real, with the real situation. And these utopias, when they actually materialize, turn out completely different. I always like this sort of thought experiment. Let's imagine, you know, there's a world symposium of physicists and, you know, let's imagine God comes down and says, okay guys, you can change one rule. Which rule would it be? What number that sort of governs the universe would you choose? And let's imagine these, you know, physicists would be very ecologically inclined, so they would decrease the friction number so that we could actually run more ecological, you know, cars, etc. On that day, when they would actually change the number, the whole universe could disassemble itself because it would simply fall apart. Now today we would probably be wise enough to decline, as our physicists, such an offer, saying that we perhaps understand a little bit of the reality but not well enough to change it fundamentally in its basic structure. Now just imagine this situation happening 100 years ago. That would be a fatally dangerous situation. Let's imagine in the modern times where people were sort of trigger happy to change things that work. Now, we in social sciences, or in the fairy tale of social sciences, are asked these questions immediately, every day. What sort of physical or interpersonal law would you change? Now, let's talk a little bit about folly. I really enjoyed what John Gray said, the difference between an error and a folly, which seems to be a sort of common subject in this debate. Folly is, if I translate this in, let's say, a psychoanalytical way, which is what I try to do when I look at the economy, is that you fetishize the id machine to the point that a subject-object reversal happens, which is exactly, I would argue, that happened with the economy. Today, the id machine, something that's supposed to fulfill your dreams, lead you to utopia, is economy. The utopia of today is growth. We are living an utopia, which is this constant religious hope, prayer, for constant growth. When you fetishize something, in other words, when you become dependent on a facility, which today I would argue is economic, what you witness is a subject-object reversal. In other words, you think you're in control of it, it becomes in control of you. And now let's go immediately into the topic of economics and into utopia, which is who will lead us into the future. In economics, we are very future happy, generally, when it comes to predictions of 1 or 2 years ahead of time, and these are usually stupid predictions of some number. growth or inflation, etc. But beyond that, our economic fantasy ends. It is not up to economists to imagine, let's say, the ending of the system, which is what John Stuart Mill considered to be the role of an economy is. What will the system leave us at when we have grown? This is something that we gave up because we have sort of fetishized the economy. Now, there's nothing fundamentally wrong with the economy. The problem is when you fetishize it. So, if you don't normatively tell where you want to end with the economy or any system, if it is resistant towards the normative, it will become normative but backwards. In other words, the economy it is an unorchestrated orchestrator. You're not allowed to orchestrate it. This is the mantra of the hardcore economics. Let it be, don't touch it, don't moderate it, and if you moderate it, by no means moderate it in ethical sort of a way. But it will moderate you. In other words, it will be normative towards you. You mustn't be normative towards it. It will be normative backwards. And this is, I think, the fundamental trick of economics that has become religion. It tells us what we are, it tells us what to do, and it tells us where to go. There is a fetish component, something extra rational, even hovering over the market. John and Kelsey and Joanna are not the smart component, the divine component of the markets. The divine component of the markets is hovering above the market, so to speak. When it comes to systems, I don't believe in systems per se. If you take an ideal image of a system, that would be a computer program. It's pure rationality, logical, mathematical algorithms, no Oedipus complex, no mass behavior, no sort of hatred.
It doesn't have to be.
Yeah, but it could be. I mean, if you idealize a system, you will think of a computer program, which is completely rational.
No, it doesn't have to be a complex system. If you have a complex system, which is corporations are a much more complex system where you have a lot more richness to it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But my point is that even these systems freeze. Even a computer system freezes, which has nothing to do with psychology. That's my point. And this system needs to be reset. And adding to the debate that was here, I don't think we as human beings will ever be able to come up with a system that doesn't freeze, or a system that doesn't produce negative side effects. What we should think about is how to perform a sort of reset of the system in a systematic way, which is one way how to read the crises is that this systemic reset was enforced from within the system. We live in fantasies of either high tech, low life, or low tech, high life. So elves, for example, would be a nice example of low tech, high life. Or if you think of this strange movie Avatar, there basically you see a fight between high tech, low life, which would be the human civilization, and low tech, high life, the aboriginal green creatures. What we are trying to achieve with economics, it seems to me, is exactly to produce high tech, high life situation. Now, these thoughts that I have heard today is something that reminds me of theology as well. I mean, there in Whitehead's perception or reading of order and chaos, he presents God as the chaos maker, and devil, contrary to classical theology, devil, the evil sort of tendency, as the status quo. And so I thought this was something that ties very well nicely with the Ouroboros reading of the economy when we go to Schumpeter or people like that who are actually keen at the destructive element. Let me close the utopia with John Maynard Keynes, his classical, let's say, essay or speech, which is economic possibilities of our grandchildren, in which he argues that economics will, 20 years from now, 100 years from when the speech was first written, become not a religious discipline which tells us what to do and how to be, because the normative part in economics is in the word is. Saying that human being is rational is, in a way, sounds like a positive statement, but it's a normative statement because it basically asserts a myth to be true and the method of doing that is an assumption. So what we need to do is to de-fetishize economics. In other words, the proper question should never be does the markets work? But the question should be, does the markets work the way we want them to work? Because if I ask, does this pen work? We all immediately know to tell us the function of the pen, and that is to write. It is not to fry, chips. But if it is something that is unclear, and the economy is unclear as to the tellers or the purpose of it, then the question is impossible. Even the question is impossible to ask: is the economy efficient, or is the economy functional? If we don't know what efficient and functional is or could be. So in the line of John Maynard Keynes, economy, I think, in the future will become a negligible aspect. It will be a maintenance science, so to speak. It will no longer be an architect that builds the house, but it will be maintenance personnel that sort of fixes the tubes. And in a way, I think we will move from supply creation to demand creation. You can see this already in the economy today, that the more important part is demand for demand rather than demand for supply. And let me just conclude with a demonstration of sort of three titans, the way our thinking of the economy changed tremendously in just one generation. And that would be IBM, Microsoft, and Google. IBM produces things, and you can see this in the history of mankind from the cradle of civilization, is we moved from things that you could knock on to things, structures of management or manufacture or whatever, a computer program. And the third stage would be non-things, and that is, I think, where we are moving towards, in a Nietzschean sort of a way, we are moving collectively to the age of a child that sort of dances and only cares about entertainment. And this entertainment industry, playful industry, is what I think is ahead of us. So IBM produces things that you can knock on. Microsoft, you can't really knock on the program, but you can at least box it and buy it in the box and buy it. Whereas from Google, you can't knock on it. It's sort of, doesn't matter if it moves to China. You can't buy Google, and you can't put it in a box. This happened in just one generation, this complete abstractization of demand and supply. If you extrapolate this tendency into the future, you might get a nice image of where the economic utopia is headed.
Thank you, Thomas. One question to you before we open it up.